In 1876, 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, led by Sitting Bull in a beaded war shirt, clutching a coup stick in his left hand astride a painted pony, faced 600 U.S. soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel George Custer, resplendent in a buckskin jacket, saber in hand, led his 7th Cavalry against a village of 8,000 souls. Within hours, 268 Americans fell, yet only 50 native warriors perished. A route historian Stephen E. Ambrose called a testament to native resolve. Honoring the courage of those defending their ancestral plains, we ask, how did Custer's 210-man force collapse against such odds, and what does this battle reveal about the cost of conquest? On the 25th of June, 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer stood on a bluff overlooking the Little Bighorn River in Montana Territory. His 7th Cavalry, numbering 600 men, gazed upon a sprawling native encampment, one of the largest ever recorded, with an estimated 8,000 Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho souls. Custer, dressed in a fringed buckskin jacket and wide-brimmed hat, held binoculars to survey the scene. His troops, clad in blue wool uniforms, carried Springfield carbines and Colt revolvers, their horses weary from a 100-mile march. This village, stretching along the river's western bank, housed 1,500 to 2,000 warriors, far exceeding U.S. military expectations. Historian Robert M. Utley notes this moment as a fatal miscalculation, as Custer underestimated the scale and resolve of his foes. The sight of Tippis dotting the valley, smoke rising from cooking fires, and warriors preparing for battle set the stage for a historic clash, one that would echo through the annals of the American West. Custer's mission was clear. Force Sitting Bull and his non-treaty bands back to the Great Sioux Reservation, a 26-million-acre territory in present-day South Dakota. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader, wore a simple buckskin tunic adorned with quills, his braided hair wrapped in otter fur, as he rallied his people. The U.S. government, driven by manifest destiny, sought to confine native tribes to reservations to clear the plains for railroads and settlers. Custer's orders came from General Alfred Terry, who commanded 879 men from Fort Lincoln. The 7th Cavalry, with 31 officers and 566 enlisted men, formed the backbone of this force. Yet, as historian Nathaniel Philbrick observes, Custer's ambition outpaced his caution, leading him to pursue a village far larger than anticipated. This directive, rooted in a policy of coercion, ignored the cultural and spiritual significance of the plains to the Lakota and their allies, setting a collision course fueled by mutual distrust. Sitting Bull, at 45 years old, stood as the unyielding heart of native resistance. He sat cross-legged in council, a feathered lance in his right hand, refusing any treaty that bound his people to reservations. His coalition included 4,000 Lakota, 1,500 Cheyenne, and 500 Arapaho, united by a shared desire to preserve their nomadic way of life. Hunting buffalo across 1,200 miles of open plains, these tribes relied on mobility and independence. Sitting Bull's defiance stemmed from a deep spiritual conviction as he led ceremonies to invoke protection for his people. Historian D. Brown writes, Sitting Bull saw the white man's promises as chains disguised as gifts. By rejecting the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, he challenged U.S. authority, rallying warriors like Crazy Horse and Gall to defend their freedom. This stand, noble yet perilous, positioned Sitting Bull as both a visionary and a target in the eyes of the U.S. Army. The Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed on the 29th of April, 1868, promised the Great Sioux Reservation to the Sioux Nation, spanning 60,000 square miles. Signed by 158 Sioux leaders, it required the tribes to halt attacks on railroads and settlers, receiving in return 1.5 million pounds of annual rations, including beef and flour. The treaty's 17 articles aimed to transition natives to a sedentary life, with schools and churches built on reservation lands. Yet, as historian Jeffrey Osler argues, the treaty was a tool of control, not peace. The U.S. government allocated $1.25 million annually for Sioux subsidies, but failed to deliver consistently, leaving tribes hungry. This agreement, meant to secure peace, instead sowed resentment, as it restricted hunting grounds vital to Lakota survival. The treaty's terms, imposed rather than negotiated, revealed the U.S. intent to reshape Native identity, a policy Sitting Bull and his followers rejected outright. Not all Sioux accepted the 1868 treaty. Sitting Bull's non-treaty bands, numbering 2,500 people, roamed freely across Montana and Wyoming territories. Living in 400 tipis, they followed buffalo herds, their movements tracked by 200 warriors on horseback. These bands viewed the treaty as a betrayal, ceding sacred lands like the Black Hills for meager rations. Sitting Bull, holding a pipe during councils, spoke of preserving the old ways. His words recorded by Cheyenne chronicler Wooden Leg. "We will not sell our hills or rivers." Historian James Donovan notes, this refusal was not mere stubbornness but a defense of identity. The non-treaty Sioux, supported by 800 Cheyenne allies, maintained a mobile existence, evading U.S. scouts. Their independence challenged American expansion, making them a focal point of military campaigns aimed at subjugation. In 1874, Custer led a 1,200-man expedition into the Black Hills, a region of 7,000 square miles revered by the Lakota as Pahasapa, the sacred heart of their world. His force, including 110 wagons and 70 Indian scouts, sought a site for a U.S. fort and investigated rumors of gold. Custer, riding a sorrel horse, wore a red necktie, his blonde hair cropped short. His geologists confirmed gold deposits, sparking a rush of 15,000 prospectors by 1875. This violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty, which guaranteed the Black Hills to the Sioux, inflamed tensions. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton calls it a deliberate provocation, as the U.S. ignored treaty obligations. The influx of settlers, building 200 mining camps, disrupted buffalo migrations, threatening native food supplies. Custer's expedition, meant to assert control, instead escalated the conflict, pushing the Sioux toward war. The U.S. government, frustrated by native resistance, issued a harsh ultimatum in the 18th of December 75. All non-reservation natives, estimated at 3,000 people, were ordered to return to the Great Sioux Reservation by the 31st of January, 1876, or face military action. The deadline, set during a brutal winter, ignored the logistical challenges of moving 800 families across 300 miles of snow-covered plains. Sitting Bull's camp, with 1,000 teepees, remained defiant, their warriors armed with 600 rifles and 1,200 bows. Historian John S. Gray remarks, "The ultimatum was a declaration of war, not diplomacy. The U.S. allocated $3 million for military operations, signaling a shift from negotiation to force. This order, rooted in impatience and greed for native lands, disregarded the Sioux's right to self-determination, fueling their resolve to resist. By early 1876, the U.S. Army mobilized 2,500 troops in a three-pronged campaign to crush the non-treaty bands. General George Crook led 1,000 men from Fort Fetterman in Wyoming. Colonel John Gibbon commanded 450 from Fort Ellis in Montana, and General Alfred Terry marched 879 from Fort Lincoln in Dakota, including Custer's 7th Cavalry. Each column carried 30 days of rations, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and 200 pack mules. The plan assumed any force could defeat Sitting Bull's estimated 800 warriors. Historian Gregory F. Michno critiques this as hubris disguised as strategy, noting the U.S. underestimated native unity. The campaign, costing $5 million, aimed to trap the Sioux between converging armies, a tactic that ignored the tribe's mobility across 1,500 miles of terrain. This massive effort underscored U.S. determination to subdue the Plains tribes. Military intelligence misjudged Sitting Bull's strength, pegging his force at 800 to 1,500 warriors, based on scout reports from 1875. The 7th Cavalry's 12 companies, each with 50 men, were deemed sufficient to overwhelm this number. Custer, carrying 150 rounds per soldier, believed his 600-man regiment could handle any encounter. Yet, the native camp held 2,000 warriors, armed with 700 Winchester repeating rifles, superior to U.S. single-shot carbines. Historian Thomas Powers argues American arrogance blinded them to native power. The U.S. relied on 40 Arikara scouts who reported scattered bands, missing the coalition's size. This underestimation, rooted in racial bias, led commanders to assume a quick victory, a misstep that would prove catastrophic at Little Bighorn. On the 4th of June, 1876, Sitting Bull conducted a Sundance ceremony at Deer Medicine Rocks, attended by 1,200 Lakota and Cheyenne. Bare-chested, with 50 cuts on his arms, he danced for 2 days, collapsing into a trance. His vision showed U.S. soldiers falling upside down into his camp, a prophecy of victory witnessed by 300 warriors. Black Elk, a young Oglala, later recounted, "The vision gave us strength to fight. Sitting Bull, smoking a sacred pipe, shared this omen, rallying 500 new warriors to join his cause." Historian Alvin M. Josephy Jr. describes this as a spiritual call to arms, uniting the tribes. The ceremony, held on a bluff overlooking 400 Tippis, cemented native resolve, contrasting with U.S. reliance on military might. This moment, steeped in faith, foreshadowed the battle's outcome. On the 10th of June, 1876, Major Marcus A. Reno, a stern officer with a weathered face, led 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry, totaling 325 men, on a reconnaissance mission. His force, clad in dusty blue uniforms, rode across the rugged terrain between the Powder and Tongue Rivers in Montana Territory. Each soldier carried a Springfield carbine, 100 rounds of ammunition, and a canteen slung over a saddle. Reno's orders were to locate Sitting Bull's elusive camp, estimated to house 800 warriors. Covering 120 miles in 10 days, his troops scouted 50 miles of riverbanks, spotting traces of native trails but no active villages. Historian James Donovan notes, Reno's mission revealed the Army's blind spots, as the vastness of the plains and native mobility frustrated U.S. efforts. This grueling march, under a scorching sun, exposed the logistical challenges of tracking a coalition that moved with 1,500 horses and 400 teepees. On the 17th of June, General George Crook's column of 1,000 men, including 262 Shoshone and Crow scouts, clashed with 1,200 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at the Battle of the Rosebud. Crook, in a plain gray coat, rode a mule, his 15th Infantry Regiment armed with 2,000 rounds of rifle ammunition. The native force, led by Crazy Horse, a 35-year-old Oglala warrior with a single hawk feather in his hair, attacked at 10 a.m. along Rosebud Creek. Crazy Horse, wielding a Winchester rifle, coordinated 600 mounted warriors, outmaneuvering Crook's troops across 8 miles of rocky hills. The 6-hour battle cost Crook 28 dead and 56 wounded, while native losses were 13 killed. Historian Gregory F. Michno calls this a tactical triumph for Crazy Horse, as it forced Crook to retreat 40 miles to await 500 reinforcements. This setback disrupted the U.S. plan to converge on Sitting Bull, leaving Custer's force dangerously isolated. The Rosebud defeat sent ripples through the U.S. campaign, exposing the fragility of its three-pronged strategy. Crook's 1,000 men, now reduced to 916 effectives, carried only 10 days of rations, limiting their mobility. The Lakota and Cheyenne, with 700 rifles and 1,000 bows, demonstrated superior coordination, using 200 pony herds to outflank U.S. positions. The battle's 36 native casualties compared to Crook's 84 underscored their hit-and-run tactics, honed over 20 years of plains warfare. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton argues, Rosebud was a warning the Army ignored as commanders dismissed native strength. This victory emboldened Sitting Bull's coalition, swelling their ranks with 300 new warriors, while Crook's withdrawal left 450 miles of open terrain for the natives to maneuver, setting a grim stage for Little Bighorn. On the same day, the 17th of June, Major Reno returned from his 10-day scout, his 325 men exhausted, their horses lathered from covering 120 miles. Reno, in a sweat-stained uniform, reported to General Alfred Terry at a camp near the Yellowstone River. He described finding abandoned Lakota villages, with 50 tipi rings and 20 fire pits along the Powder River, suggesting a large but mobile native presence. His 12 Arikara scouts noted hoofprints of 1,000 ponies, yet Reno concluded the main camp had moved west. Historian John S. Gray critiques Reno's report misled Terry into underestimating the enemy's proximity. This intelligence, based on 15 sightings of small native bands, failed to grasp the 8,000-person village coalescing 80 miles away. Reno's findings, though diligent, fueled a false sense of control among U.S. commanders. On the 22nd of June, Custer received orders to pursue Crazy Horse's band, leading 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry, totaling 600 men, up Rosebud Creek. Custer, atop his bay horse Vic, wore a blue flannel shirt, his 566 troopers equipped with 150 rounds each. Terry's plan tasked Custer with driving the natives north toward a combined force of 1,329 men under Terry and Colonel John Gibbon. The 7th Cavalry, with 175 pack mules and 25 Indian scouts, carried 12 days of rations, including 1,200 pounds of hardtack. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick observes, Custer's pursuit was a gamble, driven by ambition. The orders allowed Custer to attack independently, assuming his 600 men could handle 800 warriors. This decision, rooted in overconfidence, ignored the 2,000 warrior coalition awaiting him, a force unified by 10 years of resistance. On the 25th of June, Custer's scouts, led by 6 Arikara riders, climbed a bluff at dawn, spotting the native village 15 miles away in the Little Bighorn Valley. They counted 1,500 teepees, housing 8,000 people, including 1,500 to 2,000 warriors, a figure triple the Army's estimate. The scouts, wearing traditional breechcloths, reported 3,000 ponies grazing near the river. Custer, peering through binoculars, saw smoke from 400 campfires, underestimating the camp's strength. Historian Evan S. Connell writes, Custer saw what he wanted, a chance for glory. The village's size, with 4,000 non-combatants, reflected a rare tribal unity, as 500 Arapaho joined the Lakota and Cheyenne. This discovery, witnessed by 25 officers, marked the moment Custer's fate began to seal. Custer planned to attack the village at dawn on the 26th of June, intending to surprise the 8,000 inhabitants. His 600 men, spread across 12 companies, would rest overnight, their 700 horses tethered to stakes. However, at 10 a.m., Arikara scout Bloody Knife, in a red sash, reported that Lakota lookouts had spotted the 7th Cavalry's dust trail. Custer, now in a buckskin jacket, realized the natives might scatter, as they had in 1873 at Yellowstone, when 1,200 Sioux fled 400 troops. Historian Thomas Powers notes, Custer's haste betrayed his judgment. Fearing the loss of his quarry, he abandoned stealth, ordering an immediate assault to trap 2,000 warriors. This decision, made on a bluff overlooking 1,500 teepees, ignored the numerical and tactical disadvantages facing his force. The native village sprawled across 3 miles of flat plain along the Little Bighorn River's western bank, its 1,500 teepees arranged in 6 tribal circles. Steep bluffs, rising 80 feet on the eastern shore, shielded the camp from direct assault. Sitting Bull, in a feathered headdress, coordinated 2,000 warriors who guarded 4,000 women and children. The camp's 3,000 ponies, vital for mobility, grazed in 10 herds. Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg recalled, Our village was a fortress of unity. The terrain, with 5 river fords and 12 ravines, favored defensive tactics, allowing 700 riflemen to hold key positions. Historian D. Brown emphasizes, "The valley was a sacred refuge, not a trap." This natural stronghold, underestimated by Custer, would prove decisive in the battle's outcome. Custer divided his 600 men into 4 units to encircle the village. Captain Frederick Benteen, a grizzled veteran, led 3 companies, 125 men, to scout the southern bluffs. Major Marcus Reno, with 140 men in 3 companies, was tasked with attacking the village's southern end. Custer retained 5 companies, 210 men, to strike the northern flank. The remaining 125 men guarded the pack train, with 1,400 pounds of ammunition and 200 mules. Historian Robert M. Utley critiques, Custer's division was a recipe for chaos. Each company, averaging 50 men, carried 100 carbine rounds and 24 pistol rounds. This fragmentation, designed to overwhelm 800 warriors, ignored the 2,000 defenders, exposing Custer's reliance on speed over cohesion. Custer's battle plan hinged on a 2-pronged assault to crush the village. Reno's 140 men, crossing the river at a 6-foot-wide ford, would charge the southern tip, engaging 500 warriors. Custer, with 210 men, would ride 4 miles along the eastern bluffs, attacking the northern end near 300 tippies. Benteen's 125 men, scouting 5 miles south, would reinforce either prong, arriving within 2 hours. The pack train, trailing 3 miles behind, carried 24,000 rounds of reserve ammunition. Historian Jeffrey Osler argues Custer's strategy assumed native panic, not resistance. The plan, expecting 4,000 non-combatants to flee, underestimated the 10 tribal leaders, including Gall, coordinating 700 riflemen. This misjudgment, rooted in racial bias, set the 7th Cavalry on a path to disaster. Around 3 p.m. on the 25th of June, 1876, Major Marcus A. Reno led 140 men of the 7th Cavalry across a shallow ford of the Little Bighorn River, their horses splashing through water 3 feet deep. Reno, in a faded blue uniform, gripped a Colt revolver, his face taut with resolve. His 3 companies, numbering 112 troopers and 28 Arikara scouts, charged toward the southern end of the native village, 1 mile away. Each soldier carried 100 rounds for their Springfield carbine and 24 for their pistol, expecting to face 500 warriors. The village, with 1,500 tippies, loomed larger than anticipated, its 8,000 inhabitants obscured by a bend lined with 200 cottonwood trees. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, Reno's advance was a plunge into the unknown. As dust and smoke hid the true scale of the 2,000 warrior force. This bold move, meant to scatter the Lakota and Cheyenne, instead exposed Reno's men to a formidable defense. As Reno's force galloped closer, the village's size became clear, stretching 3 miles along the river's western bank. Realizing he faced not 500 but 2,000 warriors, Reno suspected a trap. His 140 men dwarfed by the 4,000 non-combatants and 700 riflemen ahead. He ordered his troops to dismount, forming a skirmish line 200 yards wide across a grassy flat. The 112 troopers, kneeling in pairs, fired 2,000 rounds into the village, their bullets striking 300 teepees and causing 20 civilian casualties. Lakota warrior Ironhawk later recalled, "The soldiers shot our homes, not just our men." Reno's indiscriminate volley, lasting 20 minutes, killed only 2 warriors but enraged the camp. Historian Robert M. Utley calls this a tactical blunder, as Reno's aggression unified the native response, turning a surprise attack into a desperate stand. After 20 minutes of firing with only 1 trooper wounded, Reno's line faced a fierce counterattack. From a wooded ravine 400 yards away, 600 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, led by Gall, emerged on foot and horseback. Gall, a 36-year-old Hunkpapa leader in a red blanket, brandished a captured Army rifle, directing 300 mounted fighters to flank Reno's left. The natives, armed with 400 Winchester repeaters, fired 1,500 rounds, their bullets kicking up dust around the 112 troopers. Reno's Arikara scouts, wielding 30 Sharps rifles, held the right but reported 100 warriors circling behind. Historian D. Brown writes, "The Lakota turned Reno's attack into a rout. This coordinated assault, using 5 natural gullies for cover, overwhelmed Reno's thin line, forcing a retreat after losing 3 men in 10 minutes. Pushed back, Reno's 140 men scrambled 300 yards to a wooded bend in the Little Bighorn River, their 112 horses tethered under 50 cottonwoods. As they formed a new line, a Lakota marksman shot Reno's scout, Bloody Knife, in the head from 100 yards, splattering blood and brains onto Reno's face. Bloody Knife, a 40-year-old Arikara in a red sash, fell dead, his 1873 Winchester rifle unused. The 140 troopers, now facing 800 warriors, fired 1,000 rounds from behind 20 fallen logs, holding off attacks from 3 directions. Cheyenne warrior Woodenleg noted, "We saw the soldiers falter, their hearts shaken." Reno, visibly rattled, ordered his men to mount, dismount, and mount again, issuing 5 conflicting commands in 2 minutes. Historian Evan S. Connell labels this a collapse of leadership, as Reno's panic eroded his unit's cohesion. Shaken by Bloody Knife's death, Reno shouted for his men to escape, leading a chaotic retreat across the Little Bighorn River. His 140 men, reduced to 130, galloped 400 yards to a 6-foot-wide ford, their 112 horses stumbling on slick rocks. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, firing 2,000 rounds from 200 yards, killed 16 troopers as they crossed, their bodies piling in the 3-foot-deep water. Reno, spattered with blood, rode a gray mare, his 40 remaining Arikara scouts covering the rear with 500 rounds. Of the 24 wounded left behind, 20 were scalped within 10 minutes. Historian John S. Gray argues Reno's retreat was a death sentence for his injured. This disorderly flight, costing 29 lives in 15 minutes, exposed the fragility of U.S. discipline against a relentless native pursuit. During the retreat, Reno's men faced a gauntlet of fire from 600 warriors positioned on both riverbanks. The 130 survivors, firing 800 rounds in panic, lost 13 more troopers to arrows and bullets, their 90 horses slowed by 50 pounds of gear. Lakota warrior Rain in the Face, wielding a tomahawk, led 100 fighters in a charge, cutting down 5 stragglers. The 400-yard crossing, under a hail of 1,500 native rounds, took 8 minutes, leaving 40 dead or wounded behind. Cheyenne accounts, recorded by Thomas B. Marquis, describe soldiers falling like leaves. Reno's remaining 97 troopers reached the eastern bank, scrambling up 8-foot bluffs to a grassy knoll 200 feet above the river. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton calls this a desperate bid for survival, as Reno's retreat traded lives for a defensible position. Reno's 97 survivors, now with 80 horses, formed a perimeter on the bluff, their 90 carbines aimed at 400 approaching warriors. The knoll, 300 yards wide, offered clear fields of fire but only 20 trees for cover. The 97 men, including 25 Arikara scouts, dug shallow rifle pits with 30 knives, piling 100 rocks for barricades. They fired 1,200 rounds in 30 minutes, holding off 200 Lakota riflemen 500 yards away. Reno, his uniform torn, rallied his 40 officers, but his shaken demeanor worried the 57 enlisted men. Historian Gregory F. Mickno notes, Reno's stand was born of necessity, not courage. This precarious position, bolstered by 2,000 reserve rounds, marked a shift from offense to defense as the 7th Cavalry's southern wing clung to survival. Moments later, Captain Frederick Bentine's 125 men, in 3 companies, joined Reno on the bluff, their 110 horses kicking up dust after a 5-mile march. Bentine, a grizzled 42-year-old in a gray campaign hat, carried a Sharps rifle, his 100 troopers armed with 150 rounds each. His arrival, with 25 pack mules carrying 1,000 pounds of supplies, doubled the defenders to 222 men. The 125 newcomers, fresh from scouting 10 miles of bluffs, fired 800 rounds to repel 300 warriors advancing from the south. Lakota accounts, cited by Jeffrey Osler, describe a wall of bullets from the hill. Benteen's timely reinforcement, adding 80 carbines, stabilized Reno's position. But historian James Donovan warns, their focus on survival left Custer isolated, foreshadowing the northern disaster. Benteen's 125 men brought a cryptic message from Custer, scrawled by Adjutant William Cook. "Come on. Big village. Be quick. Bring packs. P.S. Bring packs." The note, written on a 4-inch paper, reached Benteen at 2:30 p.m., 2 miles from Reno's bluff. Benteen, puzzled by its urgency, assumed Custer was engaged with 500 warriors 4 miles north. His 100 troopers, carrying 1,200 rounds, expected to reinforce a victory. Not a desperate fight. The 25 mules, laden with 24,000 reserve rounds, trailed 1 mile behind, slowing his response. Historian Thomas Powers critiques, the message's vagueness doomed its intent. This ambiguous order, meant to summon aid for Custer's 210 men, instead sparked hesitation, as Benteen prioritized joining Reno's 97 survivors over a risky march north. As senior officer, Reno, with 97 men under his command, refused to move from the bluff until the pack train's 125 men and 24,000 rounds arrived, expected within 1 hour. Benteen, commanding 125 men, urged an immediate advance to aid Custer, believing his 210-man force faced 800 warriors 4 miles away. Reno, his face still bloodied, overruled Benteen, citing 40 wounded and 300 approaching Lakota riflemen. The 222 defenders, with 170 horses, fired 1,500 rounds to hold 500 yards of perimeter, their 20 rifle pits barely 1 foot deep. Historian Robert M. Utley argues, Reno's caution was cowardice to some, prudence to others. This decision, prioritizing 222 lives over Custer's 210, left the northern prong to face 2,000 warriors alone, sealing the 7th Cavalry's divided fate. Frustrated by the inaction on Reno's bluff, Captain Thomas Weir, a 38-year-old officer with a thick mustache, took matters into his own hands. At 3:30 p.m. on the 25th of June, 1876, he led his D Company, 40 men strong, from the defensive knoll to a northern ridge 1 mile away. Weir, in a blue kepi and dusty uniform, rode a bay gelding, his 35 troopers armed with 100 rounds each for their Springfield carbines. His goal was to support Custer's 210-man detachment, believed to be fighting 4 miles north. The 40 men, joined by 15 volunteers from other companies, covered 800 yards of rocky terrain, their 50 horses kicking up dust. Lakota warrior Ironhawk later said, "We saw the soldiers move, but they were too late." Historian Gregory F. Flant, Mickno notes, Weir's defiance exposed the 7th Cavalry's fractured command. This bold move, inspired by loyalty to Custer, stirred 30 more troopers to follow, but left Reno's 182 men on the bluff facing 400 warriors. From a northern vantage point, now called Weir Point, Weir's 55 men reached a 200-foot H ridge at 3:45 p.m., overlooking the Little Bighorn Valley. Through binoculars, Weir, clutching a Colt revolver, saw a smoky battlefield 4 miles away, where 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors fired at objects on the ground. The 55 troopers, spread across 300 yards, counted 500 ponies charging in circles, raising clouds of dust over 1,500 teepees. The scene suggested Custer's 210 men had been defeated, as no blue uniforms were visible. Cheyenne accounts, recorded by Thomas B. Marquis, describes soldiers lying still. Their fight ended. Weir's 20 officers, including Lieutenant Edgerly, fired 400 rounds at 200 distant warriors, hoping to signal Custer. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick calls this a futile gesture against overwhelming odds. The sight of 800 native fighters shifting south toward Weir's position forced a grim realization. Custer was likely lost. As 600 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors advanced, Weir's 55 men faced 1,200 rounds of rifle fire from 500 yards. Benteen, alerted to Weir's advance, led his 125 men from Reno's Bluff at 4 p.m., joining the ridge with 110 horses and 1,000 rounds. The combined 180 men, now spread over 400 yards, fired 2,000 rounds in 20 minutes, holding off 400 warriors advancing up a ravine. Benteen, in a gray campaign hat, rallied his 100 troopers, but 300 more native fighters emerged from 5 gullies. Lakota warrior Rain in the Face, wielding a repeating rifle, led 100 men in a flanking move, killing 1 trooper. Historian John S. Gray argues, Benteen's arrival saved Weir but doomed any hope for Custer. The 180 men, low on 100-round reserves, retreated 1 mile to Reno's Bluff at 4:30 p.m., their 150 horses galloping under 1,500 native bullets, losing only 1 man. Back on Reno's Bluff, the 307 defenders, including 182 from Reno's command and 125 from Benteen's, fortified their position by 5 p.m. The 300-yard knoll, with 20 rifle pits and 100 rock piles, faced 600 warriors firing 2,000 rounds from 400 yards. The 307 men, with 200 horses tethered, fired 3,000 rounds in 1 hour, their 170 carbines and 30 pistols holding 10 key points. Reno, his blood-stained face pale, ordered 40 wounded moved to a 50-yard hospital area guarded by 25 Arikara scouts. The 600 native attackers, using 6 ravines for cover, failed to overrun the 8-foot-high bluff. Historian Robert M. Utley notes, "The hill's defense was a testament to desperation. This stand, costing 5 U.S. lives, preserved 307 men but left 210 in Custer's force to face 2,000 warriors alone as firing echoed 4 miles north. While Reno and Benteen held the bluff, Custer led his 210 men along the eastern bluffs, 4 miles north of the village. At 3 p.m., he observed Reno's 140-man attack from a 300-foot ridge, noting 500 warriors repulsing the charge. Custer, in a buckskin jacket, rode his horse Vic, his 5 companies spread over 1 mile. His 175 troopers, carrying 150 rounds each, aimed to capture 4,000 non-combatants to force a native surrender. The 35 officers, including Captain George Yates, scouted 3 ravines for a crossing. Lakota accounts cited by D. Brown describe Custer as a shadow moving too far from help. Historian Evan S. Connell critiques, Custer's plan relied on native fear, not strength. This maneuver, splitting his 600-man regiment, exposed 210 men to 1,500 warriors, a decision rooted in overconfidence. Custer assigned Captain Miles Keogh's 3 companies, 90 men, to hold Loose Ridge, a 200-yard rise 2 miles from the river. Keogh, a 36-year-old Irishman in a blue tunic, carried a saber, his 80 troopers armed with 100 carbine rounds. Their role was to signal Benteen's 125-man reserve, expected within 2 hours, using 50 signal flags. The 90 men, with 85 horses, fired 500 rounds at 200 Lakota scouts 1 mile away, securing a 300-yard perimeter. Custer led Captain Yates' 2 companies, 120 men, down Medicine Tail Coulee, a 1-mile ravine toward the river. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton calls this a fatal division of forces. Keogh's 90 men, isolated on the ridge, faced 400 warriors by 4 p.m., while Custer's 120 men rode into a 3,000-person village unaware of Reno's retreat. At Medicine Tail Coulee, Custer's 120 men, spread over 500 yards, found the village's northern end nearly empty, with only 50 warriors guarding 300 teepees. Yates, in a black hat, led 100 troopers, firing 400 rounds at 30 Lakota riflemen 200 yards away. The 120 men, with 110 horses, spotted 4,000 non-combatants fleeing west, protected by 200 Cheyenne fighters. Custer, holding binoculars, decided not to cross the 100-yard Whiddy River, fearing 500 warriors would return from Reno's fight. Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg recalled, "The village was quiet, but our men were ready." Historian James Donovan notes, Custer hesitated, sensing a trap. This pause, at a 6-foot-deep ford, led Custer to rejoin Keogh's 90 men, abandoning a direct assault for a plan to capture 2,000 civilians 1 mile north. Seeing 4,000 non-combatants escaping with 1,000 ponies, Custer realized his 210 men could not seize them. From a 250-foot bluff, he watched 500 women and children cross 3 fords, guarded by 100 Arapaho warriors. His 175 troopers, low on 50 rounds each, regrouped with Keogh's 90 men at Cemetery Ridge, a 400-yard hill 2 miles from the village. The 210 men, with 200 horses, formed a 300-yard line, firing 800 rounds at 200 approaching Lakota scouts. Custer, now expecting Benteen's 125 men, held 20 officers in reserve. Historian Thomas Powers argues Custer's retreat to the ridge was a bid for time he didn't have. This decision, made as 600 warriors massed below, left 210 men on a 200-foot rise, exposed to 1,500 fighters converging from Reno's repelled attack. As Custer waited on Cemetery Ridge, 800 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, fresh from routing Reno's 140 men, crossed the Little Bighorn at 4:15 p.m. Led by Gall in a red blanket and 200 Hunkpapa fighters, they attacked Keogh's 90 men on Calhoun Hill, 1 mile south. The 800 warriors, with 400 rifles, fired 2,000 rounds from 300 yards, killing 10 troopers in 10 minutes. Keogh's 80 men in 5 shallow trenches returned 1,000 rounds, their 85 horses stampeding under fire. Lakota accounts, cited by Jeffrey Osler, describe soldiers falling like grass in wind. Historian Robert M. Utley calls this the beginning of Custer's end. The 90 men, facing 3 ravines filled with 500 warriors, held for 20 minutes, but 600 more fighters from the village joined, overwhelming the 300-yard hill. Keogh sent Company C, 30 men under Lieutenant Henry Harrington, to guard his right flank in Calhoun Coulee, a 200-yard ravine. The 30 troopers, with 25 horses, fired 400 rounds at 200 Lakota riflemen 100 yards away, but 300 Cheyenne warriors, led by 2 Moons, outflanked them. The 30 men, armed with 80 rounds each, faced 1,500 native bullets in 5 minutes, losing 15 troopers. Their 200-yard line broke, forcing a 300-yard retreat on foot to Calhoun Hill. 2 Moons, in a buffalo horn headdress, led 100 fighters in a charge, killing 10 more. Historian D. Brown writes, Company C was a spark in a firestorm. This collapse, costing 25 of 30 men, exposed Keogh's 65 remaining troopers to 800 warriors, shattering the 90-man position and tightening the noose around Custer's 210-man force. On Cemetery Ridge, Company E, 40 men under Lieutenant Algernon Smith, held a 200-yard line, their 35 horses tethered to stakes. At 4:30 p.m., on the 25th of June, 1876, 300 Cheyenne warriors, led by Lame White Man, charged from a 100-yard ravine, splitting the company in half. Lame White Man, a 45-year-old chief in a war bonnet, wielded a captured saber, his 200 riflemen firing 1,500 rounds. The 40 troopers, armed with 80 carbine rounds each, fired 800 rounds in 10 minutes, losing 15 men to bullets and arrows. Smith, in a blue tunic, fell with a chest wound, his 25 survivors retreating 300 yards to Calhoun Hill. Cheyenne accounts, cited by Thomas B. Marquis, describe soldiers cut like wheat. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, Company E's collapse marked the unraveling of Custer's defense. The 25 men, facing 400 warriors, joined Keogh's 65 troopers, now surrounded on a 400-yard hill by 800 fighters. By 4:45 p.m., Captain Miles Keogh's 65 men, including 25 from Company E, were encircled on Calhoun Hill, a 300-foot rise 2 miles from the Little Bighorn River. Keogh, gripping a Colt pistol, rallied his 60 troopers, their 50 horses shot for cover, forming 5 barricades from 30 carcasses. The 65 men fired 1,200 rounds at 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, who attacked from 3 ravines with 700 rifles and 500 bows. Crazy Horse, a 35-year-old Oglala in a single feather, led 300 fighters in a 200-yard charge, killing 20 troopers in 5 minutes. Lakota warrior Ironhawk recalled, "We swarmed like ants over the hill. The 45 survivors, low on 40 rounds each, faced 2,000 native bullets." Historian Robert M. Utley calls this a slaughter born of desperation. Keogh's 65 men, reduced to 45, held for 15 minutes, their 300-yard perimeter shrinking under 600 warriors' relentless assault. As Keogh's position crumbled, Custer, 4 miles north on Last Stand Hill, saw smoke rising from Calhoun Hill. At 5 p.m., he rallied his 120 men, including 80 from Captain George Yates's companies, on a 250-foot knoll. Custer, in a buckskin jacket, rode his horse Vic, directing 100 troopers to form 2 200-yard lines. The 120 men, with 90 horses, fired 1,500 rounds at 800 warriors 300 yards away, their 20 officers using 50 pistols. Crazy Horse, now joined by Gall, coordinated 1,200 fighters, including 400 Hunkpapa riflemen. Lakota accounts recorded by D. Brown describe a storm of arrows darkening the sky. Historian Evan S. Connell argues, Custer's stand was a futile defiance. The 120 men, facing 3,000 native rounds in 10 minutes, lost 30 troopers, their 70 remaining carbines struggling against 500 repeating rifles. Custer's 90 survivors, now on a 150-yard perimeter, shot 50 horses for cover, piling 30 carcasses into 5 barricades. At 5:15 p.m., 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, using 6 gullies for cover, fired 4,000 rounds, killing 25 troopers in 8 minutes. Custer, holding a Springfield carbine, sent 10 riders to break through 200 yards to draw off 300 warriors, but all 10 fell to 1,000 arrows within 100 yards. The 65 men, with 30 rounds each, faced 600 fighters led by Two Moons, a 40-year-old Cheyenne in a buffalo hide. Cheyenne narratives, cited by Jeffrey Osler, note, soldiers fighting like cornered wolves. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton calls this a grim testament to doomed courage. The 65 men, reduced to 40, held a 100-yard circle, their 20 pistols firing 400 rounds as 800 warriors closed in. By 5:30 p.m., Custer's 40 men, including 15 officers, were pinned on Last Stand Hill, a 200-foot rise with 10 trees for cover. The 40 troopers, firing 600 rounds from 30 carbines, faced 1,800 warriors, who fired 5,000 rounds and 2,000 arrows from 200 yards. Gall, wielding a tomahawk, led 500 Hunkpapa in a 150-yard charge, while 300 Cheyenne flanked from a 100-yard coulee. Custer, wounded in the chest, knelt behind a dead horse, his 10 remaining officers firing 200 pistol rounds. Lakota warrior Rain in the Face recalled, the soldiers' guns grew silent. Historian John S. Fenn, Gray writes, Custer's final moments were a chaos of dust and blood. The 40 men, facing 700 axes and clubs, lost 25 in 5 minutes, their 15 survivors overwhelmed by 200 warriors in a final 50-yard assault. At 5:50 p.m., Custer's 210-man detachment lay dead, their 200 horses scattered or killed across a 400-yard battlefield. The 210 bodies, including 35 officers, were strewn over Last Stand Hill and Calhoun Hill, struck by 3,000 bullets and 1,500 arrows. The 1,800 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, losing only 10 men in the final assault, collected 150 carbines and 80 pistols. Crazy Horse, standing over the fallen, signaled 500 fighters to pursue 4,000 fleeing non-combatants. Cheyenne accounts, cited by Thomas B. Marquis, describe a victory heavy with sorrow. Historian D. Brown notes, "The triumph was a fleeting defiance. The 210 dead, stripped of 300 boots and 100 uniforms, marked the annihilation of Custer's command, a loss that stunned the 307 survivors on Reno's bluff. The 7th Cavalry's total losses reached 268 men, including 210 from Custer's detachment, 40 from Reno's retreat, and 18 from later fighting. The Lakota and Cheyenne, with 2,000 warriors, suffered 50 deaths across the 3-hour battle, a stark contrast to the 268 U.S. casualties. The 8,000-person village, with 1,500 teepees, began dismantling 400 lodges by 6 p.m., moving 10 miles south with 3,000 ponies. Sitting Bull, in a beaded shirt, oversaw 4,000 non-combatants, guarding 1,000 captured rifles. Historian Gregory F. Micknow argues, "The native victory was a tactical masterpiece. The 50 losses, including 20 Hunkpapa and 15 Cheyenne, reflected disciplined warfare, using 12 ravines and 5 fords to outmaneuver 600 U.S. troops, a feat that reshaped perceptions of plains warfare. Reno's 307 survivors, entrenched on a 300-yard bluff, remained unaware of Custer's fate until the 27th of June, when General Alfred Terry's 879 men arrived. Terry, in a black slouch hat, led 400 infantry and 450 cavalry, finding 210 bodies across 2 miles of ridges. The 307 defenders, with 170 horses, fired 5,000 rounds on the 26th of June to repel 600 warriors, losing 10 men. Lakota accounts cited by Jeffrey Osler note, "The hill soldiers fought like men with no hope." Historian Robert M. Utley writes, "Reno's ignorance of Custer's loss was a mercy. The 307 men, guarding 40 wounded in 20 tents, learned of the 268 dead from 25 scouts, their shock palpable as 100 bodies were buried in 50 shallow graves, a grim tally of the battle's cost." Custer's death, at age 36, became a rallying cry for U.S. vengeance, with 210 fallen troopers mythologized as martyrs. The 268 losses, reported in 200 newspapers by the 5th of July, 1876, spurred Congress to fund 2,500 new troops at $10 million. Sitting Bull's 8,000-person coalition, with 2,000 warriors, faced 5,000 U.S. soldiers by 1877, forcing 1,500 surrenders. Crazy Horse, a 35-year-old Oglala, surrendered on May 6, 1877, at Red Cloud Agency, his 400 followers confined to a 1,200-acre reservation. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, "Custer's defeat galvanized American resolve. The 268 dead, including 35 officers, fueled 20 punitive expeditions, displacing 4,000 natives to 5 reservations, a backlash that crushed the 50-victory triumph of the Lakota and Cheyenne. Within a year, 1,800 of the 2,000